Hello and welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm Michelle Solomon and I will be your host for today. We have a fascinating program for you today, all about the stage, the screen, and Shakespeare. But first, let me introduce our panelist. Marjorie Lowe is an award-winning actress who can be found performing everywhere. She also likes to perform Shakespeare. Andy Rogo is the artistic director for Island City Stage, but you can also see him directing and find him at other venues. And Dan Clancy is an award-winning playwright. But our guest today is a stage and screen actor, and he's most notably the founder of Shakespeare Troupe, Inc., whose mission is to reach and cultivate new audiences for spoken readings of Shakespeare's plays. They also train actors for Shakespearean plays. Please welcome our special guest, Peter Galman.
Hi.
Hello, Peter.
I am glad to be here.
Happy to have you.
Yeah.
And you just have been cultivating Shakespeare. Thank you for
Trying
keeping
to.
Shakespeare alive, by the way.
Well,
And
a lot of people have dug that well.
well, I just think Shakespeare for me, I studied theater and it was always kind of in the canon of what we had to learn.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm really curious about, is that still something that actors need to learn because it helps them in their contemporary plays, or just in general? Talk about the beauty of Shakespeare for audiences.
I don't know if it's still taught, but when I was in high school, I studied Latin, and I had a Latin teacher who would go to Italy and Greece, take pictures and show us pictures of the ruins. And then he brought in the play, Julius Caesar, for us to look at, after getting an idea of the tribunes and the emperors that were in that age. And then we read this play about a man who wants to be emperor, and it just dazzled me. And he had all kinds of insights into it. And that's what got me going originally in this idea of who this man Shakespeare is. And for me, I just want to be great, as an actor, and one of the easiest ways to do that is to climb one of those pedestals and get up there and do that. And I think a lot of actors today have that same urge to step into somebody's shoes and feel those kinds of emotions. And Shakespeare is big. It's got a lot of big themes and big characters. And that's one way to really feel like you've climbed a certain mountain. So it's encouraging to know that there's still that happening in the schools.
Yeah. Speaking about being good, I had the experience of seeing Peter perform King Lear, and Peter, it was astounding. And I thank you for a wonderful evening in theater.
What happened with King Lear and me, I started going to plays in Chicago, where I grew up, and I went to the University of Chicago, where there was a production of King Lear. And I brought my mother, who didn't know much about Shakespeare at all, but when the character Edmund, the villain, steps forward in the early part of the play and speaks to the audience, I thought, Mom, that's what I want to do. Wow. It was just so compelling to me. He had such size and spoke so well, and he held us all wrapped, So then I started looking into how to do Shakespeare, basically listening to records of John Gielgud, and Laurence Olivier's production of Othello. Those were on records, so I would listen to them over and over again.
This seems to be the year of King Lear right now. We have Martha Henry, a lot of women playing it as well. Martha Henry was doing it up at Stratford, and Glenda Jackson has it coming to New York, and Ian McCullen just did it.
Again and again, he does.
After this whole career that you've had, you're sinking your teeth into King Lear.
It's come back full circle.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Is it daunting? Was that a daunting task?
It is. It's mostly daunting on the voice, which I'm not sure is still there after doing 2 shows Saturday and another yesterday. The part rages a lot too, so you have to be careful of really
your instrument.
The next day, if you have to have to do it again. So it's a little challenging that way.
The language seems to interrupt audiences today in some way. I've had people, you know, I'm a theater person, but people that aren't. How does that how do you overcome that for audiences out there that are watching that may say, oh, I don't know if I could sit through Shakespeare. I mean, it's honestly,
yes.
I don't want to sound, you know, but it's true. There's a barrier of some way with that language, I think,
yes.
with some audiences.
Yes. There's the poetry of it and the rhythm of it. The verse has a rhythm. And if you can if the actor can understand what he's saying, even if it's a made-up word, you can make up your own idea of what the word is, too. And as long as the actor knows exactly what he's saying, the audience can get it. So the language, for me, is an important tool. Now, there are some antiquated references, you know, that were very topical 400 years ago. And audiences aren't necessarily going to get that. But then there are other things that happen where, in the case of Lear, he's speaking about politics, which can be very relevant today. Yeah. So it's amazing to me how timely it can be, how things just come around and speak to our generation. I think that's what has kept him alive all these years.
So you're finding that the work you choose for the troupe is still relevant for not only the actors but for the audience then?
Yeah, definitely. The relevance it's so much fun. I was doing Lear and I have this line, I'm talking to a man who's just lost his eyes. I'm trying to console him and give him some ideas how to get through life. And I'd say to him, get the glass eyes. And like a scurvy politician, seem to see the things thou dost not. And someone in the audience went, whoa.
You're getting it.
Peter, I read an article recently that posited that Shakespeare is done so often at regional theaters and even still on Broadway, and that it crowds out other plays and playwrights from that era that we are then not familiar with at all. What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot that can be done with some of the Shakespeare's themes too, though. You can write, a lot of people are writing, it's like sidebars to Shakespeare. There was a new play that came out about the first folio and how the people created it 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Which includes a lot of women behind the scenes who perhaps were frustrated actors who couldn't perform in that era. And so there's another, the American Shakespeare Center has created a contest for playwrights. If they wanted to write something along the lines of A Midsummer Night's Dream, they could write something similar to that and then be given a grant to have it performed.
I love that. That would be a great way to teach kids if they were writing, reinterpreting these stories in their own viewpoint or their own language. Yeah.
But he is Shakespeare is the most produced playwright in the world. He does.
For good
and then
reason.
eminent domain, too. There's no royalties involved either.
He's okay. He's
no royalties.
So there's that.
Goethe, the German playwright, says that the first time he read a Shakespeare play when he was 22, he said it's like a blind person being given the gift of sight. And my first experience with Shakespeare is we went in and it was Julius Caesar, the teacher passed out the play, and we started reading it. And, you know, without any background, no experience with the language. What you do now, when students come in for the first time, how do you introduce Shakespeare to them?
It's a good question because we're going into the schools now with Romeo and Juliet and The Midsummer Night's Dream. These are two plays that should have a great appeal to them already. Midsummer is the most produced play of all. It's a comedy. There's a lot of funny gags, sight gags going on as well. Actors trying to be an actor and stumbling through it. And then Romeo and Juliet, of course, it's young people in love. So that should have great appeal right off the bat there with as far as the themes go. And I think that today's music and today's verse speaking in the way of they do with rap should have an appeal if we can show them that it's been going on for quite a while. And back then it was revered. Poets were, people went to hear plays. And if we can tune them into the musicality of Shakespeare, the ba-dum, 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 and all the kind of jazzy stuff that he throws in, I think that, I've already worked with young people, and they love to pick up a sword right away. That's the first thing they like to do. They want to be, Darth Vader or one of those guys, right? Yeah. So that's already there. Yeah. Those big kinds of themes and action that Shakespeare had to have before there was show business.
I had a very famous actor, because as an actor, you when you're first approaching Shakespeare, you think, oh, iambic, this is going to be confining. And David Williams said to me, think of it like a heartbeat. And the audience will fall into that heartbeat. And he is giving you clues with that heartbeat, meaning Shakespeare, but that once he chooses to go away from it, the audience sits up and they're even more in tune. And I think that's a great point you bring up about rap, because is it Terrell McCraney's now using hip hop to teach Shakespeare?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Terrell's the man.
He's the South Florida man.
South Florida man, right? Yeah.
So how do you teach that for your troupe? These are actors that maybe haven't been around iambic or folio work.
Okay. It's in the beginning, for me, it was instinctive. Listening to Gielgud, Richard Burton, and all that, I would imitate all these guys, and then feel pretty good about that because it got me some roles, and people sense that this guy knows his way around the stage. And then I went away from Shakespeare for a while and got involved in TV and the Bucks and all that. And then I went to, this is a long run answer to your question, but it's interesting to me because I did a transformational weekend where you explore your own life and what's deep inside. And they bring you to a place, almost in a meditative state, where you're in a trance, kind of. And then they allow you to just allow anything in to that consciousness while you're there. And the first thing that popped in was my passion for Shakespeare and the fact that I had kind of put it aside for so long. And I said to myself, if I'm going to get anything out of this transformational weekend and all the money I've spent on it, I should run with this, And then things started falling in place for me in that way. I met a Shakespeare company in New Jersey, across the river, sort of like across the river from the Thames, and we were doing Shakespeare. And my acting coach had turned me on to a woman who was teaching new techniques in Shakespeare from the first folio, which is the original works, the first time it was published, at least in full, incomplete. And she was pointing out to me all the clues that were evident in the text of the first folio, and how it appeared to me that this was the master's hand telling me how it should be performed, or how it was performed, and know what the rules are first, and then go from there. And it opened up my mind to just how to play it from my own sense of Shakespeare and
you feel
the
like
passion of it.
he's there directing you. Yeah.
If you had to advise, let's say, a college theater program on what to offer in terms of training so that Shakespeare could be performed effectively, what would you tell those departments? And I ask that partly because I see in the actors that I work with on a regular basis that, we concentrate so much on just, what's my action? What am I supposed to be feeling? But there's zero training in voice and production and things and musicality that you mentioned earlier that I think are necessary to make Shakespeare come alive. So what would you advise theater programs to teach?
I would teach them to learn the rules of poetry and elocution, which are very important. If you believe, and I believe, that the talent that whoever wrote Shakespeare was God-given, that every word is in place for a reason, like a mosaic. So if he gives you a word that ends in one sound and then begins that same sound in the following word, that's done on purpose to set up the second sound. To be or not to be is a simple example of that. And they have to know that. Then it becomes not something more of a temperament thing, but you're following a guideline. So the rules of poetry, the rules of elocution are very important. Repeated sounds, onomatopoeia, which is a fancy word for a word that sounds like what it feels like. And all those other poetic licenses that are used. It's very important to know those things. You start with the text. I would try to stay away from the movies and all the interpretations of it in the beginning, because then you have people that are imitating or trying to put on some kind of a dialect or something that can be difficult in the early going with the university. And you don't want to turn people off to Shakespeare.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite production or performer of Shakespeare that you've seen?
That's a tough
one. Yes, but there's so many. When I saw it, someone came up to me and said, we want to do a reading of King Lear a few years back, and it was going to be done like in a couple of weeks, and they wanted me to play Lear. So I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this quickly. So I watched one of the Ian McKellen movies and basically did him, or at least, took all these acting beats and all the moments that he had found, and tried to put them into this reading. And he's great. He's great at it, I guess.
How do you feel about theater companies? And they're saying, well, we need to attract an audience, so they cut the text of the show.
Well, you must condense some of your pieces for schools.
Yeah. It's you try to take out all the antiquated parts, and I adapt the plays now. I try to get them down to an hour and 20 minutes tops. We did an abridged version of Lear, and I sliced at it with a machete. But then we still had the last half of the play to do, and basically we cheated and did it all in a dumb show. That is, we acted out, had a narration, and had everybody go through with it. But Andy, my favorite is now gone, and I met him. I was studying with Stella Adler, and I had. This was after I had done some Shakespeare and done some TV, and I just felt like I didn't have that New York thing. I didn't have that method thing. So I went to her and I auditioned with Shakespeare. And she looked at me and said, well, Peter, you can do Shakespeare as well as I can. But I think I can help you in the realism. And she did. She helped me with how props can help an actor to become alive and for them, and all of that. And then I was there for 2 years studying with her, and she said, come with me to a party. I've got some people I'd like you to meet. And she had all these wonderful people to meet, and there was Sir John Gielgud in the room. And I walked up to him and said, oh, Sir John, I'm a great fan. I listened to all the records, the playings of 7 Ages of Man. I memorized them and copied your voice and everything. And then he looked at me and he said, are you an actor? And I said, well, yes, I am. And he said, are you a good actor? And I said, well, yes, I like to think of myself as one. And he said, well, then you could come and see me in Home. So he brought me to the theater, and I saw him and Sir Ralph Richardson in a production of Home. And he had this incredible vocal instrument, didn't he? I watched him in Julius Caesar just the other day, the film version. I was watching other people when I first, because Brando is so powerful. When I first saw that film, Brando, the fact that he did Shakespeare was incredible, you know, and he was powerful in it too. He had such emotion and strength. And then I was watching how James Mason had really done so well with Brutus too. And then Gielgud was Gielgud, of course. And then today, I appreciate Gielgud even more because he didn't, he elevated the language, yes, but he still made it so real for himself. And that was the key, that the combination of both, to have the poetic aspect of it and yet make it your own at the same time. Sorry, I think I found the heartbeat.
So do you feel that any actor can perform Shakespeare then?
You have to have the passion for it. You know, it has to be turned on. The bulb has to be turned on somehow. You know, but I try to invite everybody into my workshops, and the professionals down here are so talented. You know, and I try to get them
excited about it.
Get them, yeah.
And you have them using sides. Explain what the sides are that Shakespeare uses.
Okay, here we have.
Look, he just has, he has a prop. He's ready to go.
Just happen to have it. Well,
here's scroll work.
The great Elizabethan actor Ned Allen, who was doing the plays of Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare, was the finest of his generation. And he had a trunk filled with all of his artifacts. And they found these, we call them Q scripts. And I don't know if you can see this close up or not. But the Q is the 3 words
That's all you got.
that you listen for when I'm on stage. I'm listening for what needs one. This is King Lear's Q script. This is my side. My side is all of my lines. That's my side of the scene, and then a few lines of Q. And that was in Ned Allen's trunk. So some of the people who do sort of archaeology, really, they're uncovering all these things about Shakespeare and who wrote it and how they did it. And it's called original practice now. And there's some people who have discovered how the words were spoken.
Patrick Tucker.
Patrick Tucker is my mentor, and he doesn't know that, but
Now he does.
but now he does. Now he does, yeah. And so the side is like a prompter. See, we still have prompters here, and the actor can keep his own prompter, which is very easy for me because. When I was on the soap operas,
Which I want to talk about.
we did ours live, so there was no cutting and doing it over. And if you messed up a line,
the soap is like every actor. I mean, I know when I started and I was in acting and I was in New York, it was like to get a soap part was like that was the actor's dream. So.
Bread and butter.
Can you just tell us about the time you were on As the World Turns and
I
One
was
Life
on
to
As
Live?
the World Turns, yeah, when it was live, and it was such high pressure. You would think. I don't know how I survived it. Because stage fright is something that I cope with all the time.
You still get stage fright.
When that red light is on, you know that you're on. And we had the 3-camera system in place, and so you knew when your angle was being put on, and the prompter was generally right under the screen there. But if you were having trouble, you know, then like I had sometimes, they would put the prompter, you know, right in the desk drawer or something, or, you know. They would say, you know, just kind of just look over here. And say, oh yes, I know, Mark. But the really good ones, the really good actors who knew their part so well, they improvised a lot. You know,
wow.
They would hem and haw and kind of get around to the point and use it to great effect. And it becomes so natural because you're kind of searching for the right words to say.
And what are some of the things you would like to see in the future for the troupe here?
Well, we're going into the schools, as I mentioned, and we are hoping to excite people at that level. And another idea is to bring some of the senior citizens who can't really get out much, but we can bus them into a theater and give them an abridged version. Lear would be great. They would love it. I think they would love Lear. There's the dementia theme, of course, which the madness, they called it madness then. But those are two key things, to be able to turn new audiences on or have them remember what it was like.
Is there a website, or how do people find out about your project?
My website is shakestroupe.org.
It's a good one. We'll remember that.
Shakestroupe.org. And it has most of our coming events on it. We're going to be in the Broward schools, Pinecrest and some of the others, Sawgrass Springs, with Romeo and
definitely
Juliet.
Keep an eye. I feel like I got a primer today.
Awesome.
I feel like I know more about Shakespeare than all those years of school. But unfortunately, we're out of time for today. But I want to thank our panelists for being here today, and such a wonderful guest, Peter Galman. Thank you so much. And we want to thank you too. I want to thank you for joining us. This show is a community show, so please give us your feedback. Let us know how we're doing. You can reach us by emailing to spotlightonthearts@browardschools.com. Give us suggestions. Let us know if there's any guests or just anything you'd like to tell us about or have on your mind. And while you're at your computer, you can go to miamiartszine.com and check out all the great things happening in our own backyard, and check out floridatheateronstage.com to see reviews of shows and a great arts calendar where you can find out all that's happening in South Florida theater, and there is so much of it. So pick something out and go to the theater. And don't forget to tune in next week for another episode of Spotlight on the Arts.